Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Today, a UN-backed anti-corruption body in Guatemala is battling for its survival as the country's president ignores court orders. We'll look at what lies in store as protests mount. Send your comments via Twitter or our YouTube live chat. Thousands of people across Guatemala are urging President Jimmy Morales to step down, following government efforts to shut down the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, known as CICIG. The body has worked with Guatemalan law agencies, helping prosecute hundreds of individuals, including former President Otto Perez Molina. This was the scene in Guatemala City last Thursday after the Morales government said it would stop CICIG's head, Ivan Velasquez, from coming back into Guatemala in defiance of a ruling by the Constitutional Court. Morales had pledged a new era of political accountability when running for the presidency in 2015, but that was before CICIG turned its eye on Morales and his family amid allegations of illegal campaign financing. Here's what CICIG has to say about its work.
Commissioner Ivan Velasquez has stated, while we are close to dismantling the criminal networks that operate within the state and within the justice sectors, while we are close to touch upon the source of illegal electoral financing, of corruption within the state, of corruptions in justice, will be more difficult our missions. For example, we have got results in this more than 16 criminal structures identified, more than 1,000 criminal cases, more than 310 sentences.
Well, the move to block the head of CICIG from entering the country came just 2 weeks after the Guatemalan government said it would end CICIG's mandate when it expires in September 2019. So what hope is there of safeguarding transparent and democratic governance in Guatemala? Joining us from Antigua, Guatemala to discuss this is Al Jazeera reporter David Mercer. In Quetzaltenango, we have Ramon Cadena. He is a human rights lawyer and director of the International Commission of Jurists Office for Central America. And in Guatemala City, we have Luis Barrueto. He is a journalist and political analyst who works with the civil society group Justicia Ya. Welcome to the stream, gentlemen. So good to have you here. I want to start on my laptop with just one of the thousands of protesters who've been out on the streets in Guatemala. This is Brenda. She writes, "I will continue protesting in the streets against the actions of this government to expel CICIG because this corrupt system has even stolen our fear, but not our faith and a possible future with justice." Now, Luis, it is not every day that you see thousands of people take to the streets in support of a UN-backed agency, but I want to give our audience a little taste into why that might be. And take a look at this from on my laptop here. This is public support for institutions in Guatemala. This is a study that was released earlier this year, conducted in 2017, and it shows support for CICIG is higher than support for the media, public ministry, the government, Congress, and political parties. Luis, help us understand, give us some context here for why CICIG is so important to people.
Well, thanks, Malika. One of the reasons why there is a widespread support for the work of CICIG is because it's been one of the most effective tools in prosecuting criminal networks and allowing for a hope of justice, as Brenda says in her comment, to illuminate the path of Guatemalan society. Seen over the years.
I'm going to pause you there, Luis, only because your connection is breaking up a little bit. So we're going to come back to you because I like what you were saying and where you were taking us. But David, you've been out there with the protesters on the streets. You've talked to them. What have they been telling you?
Well, that's right. I think that survey says it all right there. I think public confidence in any kind of government institution is incredibly low in the country. And people see that really, as Luis was saying, that the only effective organ that's been able to prosecute, to investigate and prosecute some of these alleged crimes or crimes successfully has been this outside group. And it's proven. There are a couple of cases. I believe that there's supposed to be sentences that are going to be handed down over the next couple of days, a couple of big cases involving public social security, health systems, as well as a magic elixir that was developed in order to clean one of the big lakes here in Guatemala. And those are both being taken under by CICIG. So this is an organization that's been working for the past 12 years approximately here in Guatemala. And they have won the confidence of a lot of people, and a lot of it just comes back to what happened back in 2015 with taking down or helping to take down a former president and vice president. And it's something that just hasn't been seen in Guatemala before. And that certainly won CICIG a lot of public accolades and won them a lot of support from the public.
I want to share some of that support via protesters who gathered in the streets. Here's comments of what they said, of why they were out there. Have a listen.
We are demanding the resignation of the president because he does not know how to govern. The only thing that he is doing is being manipulated by the corrupt. We are tired. We are poor in Guatemala. We have high levels of malnutrition. Education is going down. Guatemala has a lot of good things to give, but Morales is denying us that right.
If he was a good politician, he would support the fight against corruption and remove those who are corrupt from the government. But he's done the opposite. After talking about a fight against corruption, saying that he was not a thief or corrupt, he did the exact opposite. He hooked up with the corrupt to form his government.
So, Ramon, you heard what he was saying there. You hear that support there, but I want to share this tweet from Betty on Twitter. She says, CICIG is the cancer of our country. We're a sovereign state and should be treated as such. You can't fight corruption with corruption, and anything the UN touches ends up corrupt, especially when absolute power is given to an entity without oversight and accountability. So, help explain this. Clearly, there are two sides to this. Where do you fall?
Well, thank you. First of all, I think that the interviews that you showed can demonstrate that the conflict that we are suffering is CICIG is only a piece of all the puzzle. But the real problem is the fight against corruption and the fight in favor of resolving the impunity cases. So on one side, people are in favor of fighting corruption, and we believe that the President of the Republic is being an obstacle in order to fight against these corruption cases. Of course, on the other side, the government has issued a lot of campaigns. And for me, 3 points are the main that construct their campaigns. First of all, the sovereignty should be absolute. They want to bring us back to the 19th century. Sovereignty nowadays is not 100%. We have to live within the international community. Secondly, they are doing a great campaign against judges. This is a fight that the government and the President of the Republic is going on.
So they are talking about this judicial terrorism. And finally, they are trying to bring us back into the fight of communism against anti-communism. So they are saying that those who back CICIG, all of us, which is more than the 50% of the population, all of us are communists. That is what they are trying to say. And that is the reason why they make an influence on the public.
I hear what you're saying. David, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and I think this is what some of the root of the problem here is, in my perspective, is that you've got, in some ways, you've got actors from the extreme right who are playing off against, well, I shouldn't say actors against the extreme left, but it's almost, it's been something that I've noticed in Guatemala, that it seems in some ways like the country is trapped in the times of the Cold War still, and it's the communists who are against the military, and democracy came to Guatemala quite a long time ago. The peace accords were signed back in 1996. And in some ways, the guerrillas, the left wing, they sort of morphed into a lot of the NGOs and some of the public ministries, and the army morphed into the government. And these two sides have been sort of battling it out for years and years and years since then. And I think that there is this use of the term sovereignty, which is used to, paint CICIG with this brush, saying that these are foreigners who are interfering with our country. And at the same time, so many Guatemalans who I've spoken to say, we Guatemalans have shown that we're incapable of eliminating corruption from the very core of our country, and we're not able to run our country in a way where it doesn't hemorrhage migrants, with these huge flows of migrants who are heading to the United States. I mean, a large part of this is due to corruption, and it is very rotten to the very core of Guatemala. And so in some people's perspectives, the only way of clearing this is with a foreign entity that doesn't have any connections to the country. But of course, some people from the extreme right, they play this off as being a sovereign card, is that nobody should be telling Guatemalans what they should and what they shouldn't do. And I think that the majority of the population is sort of trapped in the middle of these sort of two actors.
Right. So keeping that in mind, those two sides that you laid out for us, I want to share this context via Jose Zamora. He says, campaigns against CICIG falsely state that CICIG is foreign intervention and an attack on sovereignty. The truth is that CICIG was a Guatemalan idea for which the UN support was then requested. It was then approved by Guatemala's Congress and became Guatemalan law. So with that said, even still, President Morales and his government have defended the decision to not renew CICIG's mandate when it comes time, and to block the head of CICIG, Ivan Velasquez, from coming into the country. Have a listen to the president and a member of government on why.
Aprovecho para reafirmar
I reaffirm that the decision to not renew CICIG's mandate or that of a new commission will not affect nor put at risk corruption cases in Guatemala. This statement is in response to speculation from national and international actors who have claimed that there is an alleged obstruction of justice. This has been completely rejected.
La cual queda totalmente descartada.
El señor Ivan Velasquez.
Mr. Ivan Velasquez has put pressure on Congress for reforms to the Constitution of the Republic and to change laws in the country. CICIG has sought to change laws and called on heads in Congress to influence decisions in state bodies.
A influir en decisiones de dicho órgano estatal.
So, Luis, you heard what they both had to say there, the president being one of them. Is this an instance of Guatemala relinquishing its sovereignty?
I think the question of sovereignty has definitely been overstated from the government over the past few days. In fact, as we have this conversation, he started to speak at the General Assembly of the United Nations, and he's emphasizing that he defends traditional values, he defends family, he defends life from the conception. And I think what he is trying to do, what President Morales is trying to do, is just to divert attention from the basic effort that he has conducted over the past year, and especially in the past 3 weeks, just to set a break on the work of CICIG, and more broadly, to set a break on the process of liberating Guatemalan states and institutions from the corrupt networks that have captured it since the beginning of democracy in our country, and that have resisted for quite a long time to give way to more democratic and more participative process that we're not seeing today.
And our apologies for the connection there. Luis is coming to us from Guatemala City, and the connection's a little bit choppy there, but we could make out what you were saying. You said that you believe that this has been overstated, this idea of sovereignty being relinquished. I want to share a comment, though, from an author of a piece who talks about this is the headline, it sums it up for us. She says, 5 ways the Guatemalan government is trying to dismantle CICIG. And in it, she says, one of those ways is by dismantling the police force. Surprising ways that you may not know about. Here is what Jimena Enriquez had to say.
The police department plays a crucial role in the fight against corruption. They execute arrests, help with the investigations, and protect prosecutors. Earlier this year, the government fired the police chief and many of the high-ranking officers in the department. They also shuffled around investigators to different areas, and even relocated 40 of the police officers that had been assigned directly to CICIG. Without the police department and with all these changes in the leadership, there is a direct impact in the fight against corruption because it handicaps the manpower to carry it out.
So she seems to give us just one way that corruption and a government that is accused of dealing in corruption affects people in their everyday lives. Here's another. This is Juan on Twitter who says, corruption affects the daily lives of Guatemalans in unexpected ways in this unjust and unequal country. Non-existent or deficient public services like education, health, transportation, and roads. Middle-class citizens must spend money in order to substitute them with private services. And that's just a small list there, David. How is this affecting people that you talk to in their everyday lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's corruption is a massive problem here. And just before I get onto that, I just wanted to mention one thing. There had been an interview that had been done with the head of the Special Prosecutor's Office Against Impunity in Guatemala, called the FECI, and they're the ones who work hand in hand with the CICIG, but they're on the government side, they're a government entity. And the head of that office, Juan Francisco Sandoval, he said recently that he was afraid that if CICIG left, that Guatemala would go back. Guatemala would regress to where they were before CICIG's arrival, which means higher rates of crime, which means more inequality, which means more poverty, which means more impunity, an arrest rate of something like 0% on violent crimes. And so the very man who's in charge of prosecuting corruption cases for the Guatemalan government is saying, CICIG, please don't go. So I thought that was something that was important to point out there. Mm-hmm. And yeah, from the reporting that I do across the country, it's very interesting, actually. Guatemala is a very polarized country, and perhaps it finds itself more polarized today than it has for many years. And I tend to find that it tends to be the people who are poor, the people who would like to have some of those government services that were mentioned in that tweet, the people who are lacking in public education, the people who don't have access to healthcare, and the people who are really struggling. These are the same people who are thinking about making that expensive and dangerous trip to the United States illegally. These are the people who really are in support of the work that CICIG is doing. They're hoping that Guatemala has a possibility to change and be a more inclusive society and represent their interests. So really, and then I think when you get around people maybe who have a little bit more money and they already pay for all these private services, then they're not as, potentially, some of these people aren't as concerned with the work that CICIG is doing, and that's where you get a little bit of the bite back, shall we say. But certainly traveling around the country and seeing the myriad of problems that Guatemala has, from child malnutrition, which is a story that I did, which you were just seeing there, to high rates of violence against women, violence against children, poverty, inequality, food security. The list goes on and on and on and on. And at the root of it all is corruption. So there's certainly a lot of people who want to get at that issue. The question is, how do you do it? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're debating right here, right now.
And clearly, so many of our commenters on Twitter say how you do it is by allowing CICIG to stay, and to stay even past their mandate. This is Asier on Twitter, who says CICIG will work normally until September 2019. With Ivan Velasquez outside from Guatemala. I think he won't return to Guatemala. Remember, he is being blocked from returning, but he will designate another person to lead CICIG in Guatemala, although he will go on being the leader from Washington. So this is one idea of what may happen, Ramon. How do you see this playing out? Who will back down first, the government or CICIG?
Well, I think it also depends on the demonstrations from the Guatemalan people. Because as we saw last week, the demonstrations were big, and half of the population, or more of half of the population, is against the government. A lot of people don't feel that we are represented by this president, and because he is fighting for his personal interests. So I guess that first of all, the people has to continue demonstrating in order to be able to move back the government to where we were before the president announced that the CICIG mandate was going to be renewed. I think that will depend. That will depend on huge part of that. And the other part is that the national institutions should also
comply with their mandate, because we see that the Attorney General is not reacting, and she should have already started an investigation against the president, and the president should be in jail by now. So it depends on what the institutions do. And this also demonstrates that the national institutions will not do anything in order to fight corruption if CICIG is not in the country.
I think I'd just like to say that, back in 2015, during the massive protests, the street demonstrations that there were, which eventually led to the downfall, the street demonstrators were, sort of working together, which Justicia Ya from Luis as well. I know that they were really instrumental in bringing those street demonstrations together. And there was 50, 60,000 people down at the plaza, the Central Plaza in Guatemala City every second weekend. There was a huge number of people. From what I've seen over the past couple of weeks, although this is a very critical moment in Guatemala's history, I didn't see the same number of people coming out onto the street. Now, I don't know if corruption has, well, I'll tell you, actually, a few people who I've spoken to, people who I would have expected to have been pro-CICIG, they told me that they weren't. They told me that illegal campaign financing, whether Jimmy Morales is guilty of that or not, I don't know. But they said this is something that's always been done in Guatemala. It's a small amount of money. It's not something that affects their pocketbooks particularly, and so they don't have a particular fight with that. Back in the time of Otto Perez Molina, the former president who was removed from power, now he had stolen, allegedly stolen millions of dollars out of the customs houses. This affected people's pocketbooks directly, and I think that's where you got a lot more people out. I don't see that popular support for CICIG right now. I just don't see it coming out onto the people coming out onto the streets right now. And I think the institutions are going to be hard pressed to try to fight against some of the moves that Jimmy Morales is making without having that public support. So a very different time.
And David, speaking of Jimmy Morales, I just wanted to share with our audience, because this is breaking right now, of course, the UN General Assembly is going on. If you take a look at my screen here, President Jimmy Morales is speaking at UNGA right now as we speak. Here's one tweet about what he is saying and scheduled to say. Morales is indicating that it would be very timely for the Secretary General of the UN to account for the funding that is used by CICIG. So he is there speaking about his distaste for this body. Luis, I know you wanted to get in there. We only have about a minute left, but how do you see this going forward, keeping in mind that this is what your president is advocating for on the UN floor now?
Regarding the massive protests on the last comment by David, I think the crucial part of this has been that protests have been smaller, but they have been widespread throughout the territory of the country, not just focused in the main plaza in the capital city. And that I see as a positive development, and it's also maintained throughout the different weeks that this crisis has taken place. I think most of the attention of observers should focus now on the role of the Constitutional Court, because the Constitutional Court has already ordered the president to backtrack and allow Ivan Velasquez into the country. And they have constantly announced that they will not abide to. They just gained time earlier this day, introducing several resources to delay the court's action on the topic. But I think the magistrates should be aware that they're playing a game of constitutional hardball, and that their mandate is very much under question by the president, and they are charged with defending the constitutional order and the future of democracy in this country, not just CICIG. It's a broader issue here.
Right. I hear what you're saying there, and under question indeed. I will end with this tweet here. This is tweeted out by the Americas Society. Guatemala's Jimmy Morales is now discussing the CICIG during his UN General Assembly address. Quote, "We believe that a decade was enough time for it to complete its mandate." So those are the words of the president. We will continue to keep an eye on this story. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today, but we want you to keep your comments coming via Twitter, Facebook, and aljazeera.com/the stream. We'll see you online.